So my paper will be looking at how political figures and how they become public characters, open source bodies, through which layers of storytelling, fictions, and facts blur and merge into a hot mess of how we perceive the character, a supposed representation of political ideology. This has a huge bearing on our lives and our understanding of reality. I approach this research as an artist. I'm going to be honest with you, although it might feel like a rarity coming from someone speaking in a setup like this. I'm sure we will remember when Michael claimed that people have had enough of experts. I'm not an expert, and I certainly don't feel like one. Rather that I feel like an intruder. I think this is in part because I consider myself an artist. It might be worth starting by trying to frame my practice, or to frame my position as an artist, as art can be seen to be distant, disconnected, unrelated, working only within the realm of entertainment, aesthetics, or the spectacle. This is something the art world and myself battle with constantly. And I don't think art will directly change Brexit or elect a new president of the United States. So I guess almost coming back to what Fern and Kevin were talking about at the beginning to do with not having a background necessarily in politics or visual cultures, I'm going to start with a quote by David Joseph. As a form of research, art can accommodate the notion of information out of place, or types of content that other formal disciplines or professions cannot absorb. And moreover, it can track the plasticity of information, the shapes it assumes through circulation, shifts in scale, saturation, and its velocities and frictions, which is deeply enmeshed in relations of power. Art, in other words, is a resource for working out a politicized and materialized, even formal, theory of information that is pertinent to cognitive justice. And I promise that will be the longest quote to say. I'll go back and I'll start with my first thread of how I came to explore these issues, which is that of public relations and the tactics used within a political context. Looking closer at the pragmatics played out in contemporary political PR, Trevor Morris and Simon Goldsworthy used the comparison of commercial PR and political PR, saying political PR thrives off of a negative campaign. Remember when David wouldn't stop bashing on about Jeremy's suit? This is partly driven by the fact that a political campaign is made inseparable from the personalities that represent these political parties. While some companies do have a face associated with their brand, when I say Virgin Group, which individual do you think of? Most corporations, however, do not. In politics, personality or character is everything, as personality-based stories seem to always grab the headlines. It becomes relatable. They cease to look like experts and attempt to present themselves as everyday people. Over the past year, I worked for a film production company and was involved in the most meticulous processes. I began to realise the labour committed to refining what seemed to be the most ridiculous details. We would spend hours ensuring lighting was shone in the correct way to highlight the curvature of a tomato. I often find myself daydreaming about the setup for Teresa. The lighting, the clothing, the jewellery, the backdrop, the language. These are all surface level props, a crafted and constructed process that often goes unnoticed. Politicians are crafted by PR experts, much like in the film industry, to be portrayed in a certain light. PR ensures appearance has a continuity, that a politician is shown in the correct way. It controls a certain image, and in turn controls a particular perception. In Capitalist Realism, Mark Fisher explains, late capitalism repeats from Stalinism is just the valuing of symbols of achievement over actual achievement, and thus real-world effects matter only insofar as they register at the level of PR appearance. What we can take from this is that representation holds a higher position than any actual real results. The appearance of personality is valued more than any political achievement the individual may have succeeded in. And as an example of this, it's almost as if there isn't even a correct way after all. Fisher continues, using Zizek's reading of Lankin's Big Other, to understand how these PR appearances function, even if the individual does not believe in them, saying, "The Big Other is the collective fiction, the symbolic structure, presupposed by any social field. The Big Other is that it does not know everything. It is this contuitive ignorance of the Big Other that allows public relations to function." So it's the politician's job to continue feeding this Big Other, continue spinning the lies, the collective belief that must be protected to continue the alienation of neoliberalism and to ensure control. PR is the tool used to continue this belief. More specifically, perception management, which was popularised by Adam Curtis's hypernormalisation, or reality management, which is coined by Mark Fisher in his blog K-Punk. What reality or perception management is achieving is turning one's known understanding of reality into a material that is malleable rather than a fixed state. Once this has been acknowledged, the sky becomes the limit. Anything could be anything, especially if those being manipulated believe in a fixed reality. If those in power use reality or perception management, it has the potential to change mass perception. Essentially, one will never know what reality is, as even a reveal in this context could be employed to redirect us away from the truth. Reality management is another PR tactic that supports the Big Other, working through appearance rather than reality. So, Malcolm Tucker shows us this perception management in motion in collaboration with the media. But this is only one side of what post-truth consists of, as journalist Matthew DeCona dissects in his book Post-Truth, The New War on Truth and How to Fight Back, that it is within politicians' interest to appeal to the voters, convey a relatable feeling. The dangers of emotional response to political campaigns means voters gravitate to a connection with a political candidate for their character rather than their policies. This is blown out of the water through a shift in knowledge hierarchy, as the rise of the internet has opened up ways of challenging this hierarchy through social media. As DeCona concludes, the web has abolished the gulf between the centre and the periphery, between the official and the fringe. So this is an excerpt from a film I made last year. So through repurposing monologues from the 1976 film The Network, I realised audiences felt connected to this rendition of How I Feel. Only those who had seen the film understood the monologue's true origins. Those who did not took it as something original, a work reacting to the current state of the world we live in. I began to think about how actors take on characters that have already existed, and embellishing them with their own flair, and how I, as a producer, could control how this is read through purposefully placed outtakes. I'll travel back now. Like many of us, commuting home and picking up the Evening Standard, always tainted with the thought of George as editor. Get home, bombarded with more images, news feeds, videos, headlines, forums, memes, hashtags, Twitter wars, your uncle's timeline, some of the images I come across. Teresa photographs slurping down a glass of red, Donald's toupee blowing in the wind. It becomes difficult to differentiate between these images and those from the celebrity gossip section. The multiple layers, the multiple interpretations, multiple fictions, multiple sources, multiple authors. This leads to a layering of fictioning. As Simon O'Sullivan describes in Practice of Fictioning, fictioning is the layering of spatial and temporal modes to create a different space-time, and with the prevalence of the digital, this can be achieved with speed and density. These bodies become part of a production line, a template, and in turn become an open source body, a character for the media and online communities to mould and shape, further than that of PR, using collective satire as a form of consciousness raising. These new interpretations, or fictionings, create the public character, a problematic figure, much like my actor, as truths and origins become lost, as does any other significant political potential or dangers, and appearance prevails above all. And actually, when we were doing Edwin's talk, I'm not sure if he's still here, but we were discussing the versions of reality and leaking out through these different means, and it kind of reminded me of what I'm kind of discussing now about what a public character is, at least in my words. So these multiple authors and stories contribute to the post-truth I was talking about earlier. If voters are accustomed to associating with feelings, then it becomes easier to tap into the emotional response through listening to these multiple sources. As the internet gives way for these authors, even if it's a meme, to have some form of credibility, and therefore truths and origins become irrelevant. There will always be a community online within its own bubble, which can support any feeling or theory the voter holds. Reality management becomes self-sufficient, self-regulated. Now I'm going to show you something I'm working on at the moment that's not quite complete. This is an excerpt from a film I'm currently developing for which there will be an Ali this summer. This piece is not complete yet. I've been thinking about how to create these public characters, how to portray them, represent them, dissect them, then put them back together, or more importantly, how to resist them. In the process of this work, I come across problematics in political representation. I'm casting white bodies, for this is the body in power. I question if I should be creating new possibilities and new potentials instead, to show what can be, rather than what is. Am I not just contributing to an issue that is prevalent within the film industry and within politics, one of lacking in representation of bodies other than white? But isn't this just the hegemony of the weird industry that I'm trying to satirize and critique? Of course, these are representations of public characters, more layers, embodying a representation of extreme examples of what the character goes through, and it's difficult at this point to talk much about this work as a whole, other than on a pragmatic level of what has been physically done, as the work is incomplete and relies on an audience interaction, for lack of a better word. In an attempt to understand mechanisms through my artistic practice, I take on processes and roles. One example of the processes I'm going through at the moment is that of editor, the ultimate control freak, with moving image as my malleable material. Having the power to select, delete, and add, becoming a technological spin doctor on a small scale. During editing, the original script becomes less important as I work towards rewriting the narrative with pre-existing content, forming new stories and fictions. Perhaps I should return to how I frame the artist. As stated, I'm not trying to solve the issues I've described today, rather interpret the information, repackage and re-represent, or even reveal. Returning to Joseph, he continues, cognitive justice means resisting the dumbing down of public speech and its attendant spectacle, as when someone with a decades-long career and a complex set of policies is falsely characterized and dismissed as crooked Hillary. Through reimagining structures, art has the capacity to resist and allow others to interpret the information they come across in their day-to-day lives. While no one piece of work will encapsulate a complete understanding of the complex situation we find ourselves in, I can at least attempt to disrupt assumed narratives.